But I know about him. I read about him. He won a Silver Star and a Bronze Star for conspicuous gallantry in Vietnam. And it's an interesting story because he spoke at a commencement address at Yale and, against the war, and then decided if he, I assume, wanted to know what he was talking about, he should go into it, and he did. Will you welcome Mr. John Kerry? This is most interesting, the situation. Could you explain how that came about, that you were opposed to the war and then entered it?
Well, I think that initially I wasn't so much opposed to the war as I was opposed to the entire policy of intervention which we were pursuing in this country. Mm-hmm. And I spoke more against that and against the draft and against Vietnam because it was part of that. Mm-hmm. And then I wound up going to Vietnam because in 1965, voicing an objection, as I would have liked to have at that point, would have been, I think, a very futile thing. And as a student of political science, I felt it'd be much, much smarter to try and find out really what it was that was happening there and what the war is about, and then come back and speak from a position of strength, which I think I can do now. And really, with all due respect to the Director of Communications, what I think we have in this country on the war as well as on other issues is a failure to communicate. And I think it's becoming a very, very significant thing right now, which hasn't been addressed by the President, by the administration.
Mm-hmm. It's very unusual to be, it's hard to see how you can be opposed to the war and then participate in it.
Well, as I say, my opposition to the war was not at that time a strongly moral opposition. It wasn't an opposition on grounds of what was happening in Vietnam. It was an opposition that was based on our broad spectrum of foreign policy. The fact that we have troops in over 100 nations and that we're defended to commit 100 nations. We have troops in over 40. We're giving aid to over 30. This kind of extension bothered me and still does. But as to the war in Vietnam, at that time the administration was still talking about going to Vietnam in order to try and allow the government to exist in the form that we felt was advantageous to it. And in fact, that meant giving them elections. Well, this changed radically after I was in fact sworn in and after I was a member of the armed forces. I think it really changed towards the end of 1965. We had 200,000 troops at the end then and went up to 550,000 in the next 2 years. And I think the difference is when I began to crystallize my thoughts.
Dick, just in view of your question, I think one key thing is that a great number of young men who serve with Mr. Kerry don't go there because they think it's something that they want war or that they maybe support this war, but they go because it's their duty to their country. And I think that few Americans really want war of any kind.
Well, frankly, I don't think that I know very many American soldiers who look at it that way. They're unknown to many people in this country. Bob Hope tried to defend the war in Vietnam this year, and he was booed.
Where was it?
This was in Long Binh, just outside of Saigon.
I didn't know that.
He was booed. And I know from my point of view, what I found over there was, I've lived part of my life in France, and during this period I used to go out and I'd see the bunkers outside of the houses, and you could get a very distinct impression for what it was like to be a country completely at the mercy of a foreign force. And quite frankly, when I was in Vietnam, I have to say to you that I just could never feel that I was there fighting to save that country, to make it safe for democracy. The only feeling you could have was that you were like the German, that you were there occupying another country. And really this feeling of imperialism is one that actually does pervade much of the world now when they look at the United States of America.